Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the TFC audio project. In this episode of Shop Talk, Mike and I have a conversation about how we use a scientific method to guide our teaching and treatment approach. We break down the key elements in the process of science, and we talk about some shortcomings of published research. We also talk about using logic, reason, and critical thinking as a base before you can apply science properly. This episode is sponsored by our travel partner, Nanook Protective Hard Cases, which we use to transport gear at our seminars and workshops. You can check out their badass cases at nanook.com, Nanuk.com. This Shop Talk episode is also sponsored by TFC-shop.com. It's an online store that sells footwear that lets your feet function like they're supposed to, with styles from some pretty awesome brands like Vibram, Vivo Barefoot, Shema Sandals, and Earth Runners. We also sell toe spreaders at tfcshop.com, and toe spreaders are a pretty simple and inexpensive accessory to help you restore optimal toe alignment after spending time in narrow pointed shoes. So when you spend time in narrow shoes, your toes start to curve inward towards the center of your foot, causing things like bunions and foot-specific issues, rather. So the toe spreaders are something you can put on at night. They spread out your toes. They help to offset those effects and improve your toe alignment. We also sell balance beams at tfcshop.com. And each TFC balance beam is built using the most durable and lightweight materials. We powder coat them, which is a really durable finish. So these things are designed to be used as a piece of commercial gym equipment and never break down. So they're kind of overbuilt, but they last a lifetime. And each TFC beam comes with access to a movement database of progressively more difficult movements, so you can restore your hip stability. Starting with something as easy as balancing on one leg and working up to more complex challenges, tuning your hips and your hip stability specifically helps to open up the hips and ankles and gives you access to more strength with lifts and also better technique with running, and in addition to injury prevention. That's it for sponsors, so let's get into it.
It's the TFC audio project.
It's a collective effort. Help people understand their bodies. Starting at the feet are the gateway for people to see that there's an issue. A foot conversation is always a whole body conversation. Hey folks, Nick and Mike here from TFC. Welcome to Shop Talk episode number 7. And today we're going to just kind of have an open conversation about science and research. Compare the two, talk about how we use the scientific method to guide what we teach and how we treat, and just talk about some of what we feel are shortcomings in some of the research literature and the fact that research is important, but just kind of chatting about how we can piece that into practice to make sure that we get the best outcomes. So hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Let's start. So, one thing is that in our seminar, we always say that our approach is guided by science and not research. And that's probably a little bit too simplistic to pit them against each other like that. So I think let's start by just defining science and research. So science, the scientific method. Let's even start there.
Yeah, so the scientific method, it's something that got drilled into our head from an early age because we both took the route of science in high school, and then going down into university, taking biology. Basically, I don't know if you remember, like the first course or the first few classes of every science course, it would like go over the actual scientific method.
Yeah,
and it would just like
remember
it's
that
like
slightly.
Every single year, and it was like, okay, we've learned this before, but
which is important because that basically forms a foundation to say that professors aren't teaching you something where you should listen to them because they're the authority. They're saying this is the method of science. This is how you determine objective truths and test them and make sure that they actually hold water instead of just taking something at face value that someone tells you, which I think is
exactly.
So, like the amount of people that tell me facts these days, and then you ask, where'd you hear about that? And they're like, oh, Google.
Yeah.
Or Facebook. It's like, what? Since when did Google or Facebook become reputable sources of knowledge that you just spit out as facts? So I think it's so easy these days.
The tool, like it basically what it defined is like the tool of science, and how do we use this tool to come to conclusions on things. So basically it's the biggest thing is we're trying to test things in nature and develop truths. We're trying to come closer to getting objective truths on things in nature that we can observe and study. So that's the big thing.
Even let's talk about truth, because even on the Rogan podcast the other day, Neil deGrasse Tyson was on there and he was comparing kinds of truth. And I can't remember the third one. He said 3 kinds, but 2 of them really, really resonated with me. Number 1 was an objective truth, which is where, something is true whether or not you believe in it, right? An objective truth is something that the methods and tools of science have proven to be an objective truth, right?
And multiple studies and multiple
Yeah.
different sources have also come to this exact same conclusion.
Yeah, and he said no one scientific result is true until it's verified by other people with good quality science. And then the other truth that he mentioned was personal truth, and that's something like, heaven is a place that you go to when you die. That's a personal truth, right? It's not objective. It's not. It could be shared by others, but it's not actually proven using the scientific method. And I think a lot of the flack that we get is people who believe in a personal truth that contradicts the objective truth that we're trying to put out there, where we're changing the way that we're looking at feet and treating feet and restoring hip and foot dysfunction. And if your personal truth is that orthotics are a good treatment method, whether it's because you're in that industry or you invested heavily for yourself, that personal truth goes against the objective truth of what we're saying, which is your feet function best barefoot. And I think that's a source of a lot of disagreements, right?
Exactly. And I think that brings us to, I think, the backbone of what science, underneath science, is this: the base of the pyramid should always be critical thinking, logic, and reason. Yeah. So,
which is missing in so many stupid Instagram conversations these days.
Oh, exactly.
And it's just, social media is a weird media to converse with because it's so impersonal. It's so, you can just, you wouldn't go up to someone on the street and yell something in their face, but you can basically do that in social media by putting everything in caps and saying something really controversial. It's so weird.
But if you think about, so let's delve into the critical thinking, science, or logic and reason, because that is something that is, in the grand scheme of humans' existence, it's a new concept, and it's something that if you look at where the origins are, Socrates is actually kind of well known to be the first person who developed critical thinking, ways to actually look at things and critically think about things. And
science is the technology. Sorry to interrupt, but even just thinking about it, science, the actual method of good quality science, is a technology that's very recent, like you said.
For sure.
So we didn't always have
That's
this.
even after that.
Yeah.
But at the base of that is how are we thinking? So basically, back in the times of Socrates, there were whoever was in the highest power, let's say it was the kings, their word, that was the truth. Whatever the people in the highest power or in the positions of power said, that was what went for everybody.
That was taken as the objective
That
truth.
was the objective truth. All the peasants, basically it was some person, a random person, decided what was true and what was not, and that was just trickled down to everyone below it. So you almost had to rely on you had to take it at face value. So that's where all these weird, wacky ideas from people in ancient times came about. They'd believe in all these crazy things because it's somebody just told them that was the truth.
Yeah, it's appeal to authority. It's the same way that our monetary system is still done, but it's just someone's telling you something, you assume that authority knows what they're talking about, so you believe what they're saying without any really critical evaluation or rigorous testing of what they're actually saying.
Exactly. So basically Socrates came in and he's like, well, we need to have a way of thinking about things that questions these beliefs, right? And puts them through the rigor of critical thinking. And before it was even known as science, he's saying that basically his method is keep questioning and try to find holes in these beliefs. And if you ask somebody enough questions, you'll find where they might be misrepresenting something based on other vested interests, beliefs that they got from somewhere else,
and if that person
egoism.
If that person is on the same page, I think I speak for you too when I say when we're at seminars and people ask challenging questions, I like that. I like having our thinking and our way of doing things challenged so that I make sure it's a complete method. It's a complete system, right? So if that person is actually interested in the truth, they should enjoy you challenging and asking good questions. And I think, when you get someone that gets emotionally upset at good rational questions, it's maybe that tells you something about their motive or their background, right?
You need long form discussion like that, and to really get to the root of a topic, you can't have these little, like you said before, with Instagram or other things. You need to talk to somebody face to face or long form and just get to the bottom of how somebody's thinking about things. Because once you delve deeper and deeper in that, you can come to these areas that's where you formed that belief. We've delved 10 levels deeper, and it was we found a common ground where it makes sense why you think that now. But maybe if I explain it this way to you, do you agree with this? And if you can break that 10 level deeper argument down, and they become on the same page as you, then everything that you were arguing about before becomes common ground. So a lot of these things are we just need to look at every stage of the argument and and that's where this deductive reasoning and this critical thinking skills comes into play. And I think that's a big problem with the school system, is because a lot of people are just very poor thinkers, and it's just the truth, right?
Yeah.
No one, you have to
No one's
seriously
being taught how to be a good thinker. They're being taught how to be a good
stuff.
memorizer.
They're being taught stuff and facts, but they're not being taught how to actually think about things and see for themselves whether something has sound logic behind it, and question things appropriately. And then, that's the other part of things, is people have become these skeptics to the extreme. That's not good either. People are like, well, show me the studies, and it's like, well, no, you've got to use this. Maybe we can get into that later.
That's so true. Is there a baseline of logic first? Let's start with that.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, do you agree that the human body functions like this? Do you agree? Find points of agreement, because I think everyone is so obsessed with finding points of disagreement, they actually get blinded and they get tunnel vision to not even looking for points of agreement, which creates a foundation for a good discussion.
Exactly.
Right? If you're not even open to, if you're not even open-minded to having your thinking challenged, then discussions go nowhere. They go nowhere. It just turns tribal. You versus me. My goal is to beat you. My goal is not to find the truth. And that's a shitty way of doing things. And that's done so much now. It's like, if you want to have an open conversation, I don't care if you're, a pedorthist. I don't care. If we're all on the same team, we're all on team, help humans understand their bodies better and fix themselves. If you're not on
and
the
discover
team,
the truth.
If you're not on the team, I don't want to have a fucking talk with you. I don't want to discuss something with you, because it's just going to create confusion. And if you are on the same team, then I want to have an open discussion. If we have very differing ways of thinking, let's find out where we agree, where we disagree, and let's actually critically evaluate whether what we disagree on, whose way of thinking is actually better based on the data that's available,
or just different. And in many areas too, there's multiple different ways to do things. But I mean, if it's just this versus that, and like you say, if people are so emotionally charged, and all we're trying to do is just find what the truth is in any given thing, and that's what science is there for. Science is just a tool to uncover truths of nature. And again, the tool can only be used. It's just a tool. It's how you use the tool. This is what people don't understand. Because you can just as easily abuse the tool of science or abuse research, which I see a lot of people doing these days, because you can handpick science, you can fudge numbers, you can fudge statistics, you can create poorly. Maybe we should delve into
you can cherry pick whatever results you want to prove. And just on a note from before, I was listening to a conversation the other day, and two people were just going at each other's throats, and the actual premise of what they were disagreeing on, it was basically like me saying a square has 4 corners, and the other person was saying, no, a square has 4 sides, and they were butting heads and disagreeing. It's the same fucking square. It's the same. You're saying the same thing. You're taking a slightly different look, but you're getting so obsessed with disagreeing with each other, you're not even understanding that you're talking about the same square. They have 4 sides and 4 corners. So, but like you said, research or science is a tool. So let's get into that a little bit, because people are they're using the guise of science to try and show something that really is too simplistic to actually be true.
Yeah. And so just to reiterate what we've talked about so far, is that science is a tool. Underlying that tool is your ability to utilize the tool. Now, you can be a shitty utilizer at the tool, or you can be a good utilizer at the tool. So in order to utilize the tool well, you need to develop very sound, solid critical thinking skills, which use logic and reason to form your truth, right? And the truth. So you need to use this to use science appropriately. And then science isn't the be all end all. It's that tool that we can then make other assumptions by using that tool. So I think that if we look at one single one-off study, let's break down one study. So if you look at a study, science aims to develop, basically you take a hypothesis. So you have a question or something you want to study. From there,
you make a prediction, right? You ask a question. Does let's give a sample hypothesis. Does conventional footwear disrupt how your foot functions? So that's a question, right? So it's either conventional footwear does not disrupt how the foot functions, or conventional footwear inhibits or creates a dysfunction in the foot. Those are the two kind of routes that you do.
And then you can make basically some predictions on that.
Yeah.
Based on other evidence that's currently out there, your own.
And based on logic.
Based on logic.
Based on a knowledge of physiology of the body to create this baseline understanding of, okay, you can ask whatever question you want, but if it's a shitty question, the science isn't going to show you anything that's valid.
No, exactly.
Right? So ask a good question based on an understanding of how the body functions at a base level, and then make sure the question is one that carries weight and is actually relevant.
And then is the question falsifiable too? You need to have like you say, a solid question that is falsifiable. Mm-hmm. From there, you need to carry out experiments. So that's how research is done, carrying out experiments on that hypothesis to deduce if it's true or not. Mm-hmm. We can get into like, whatever you find is it statistically significant. You can run it through the gamut of statistics and things like that to determine.
Well, is
things.
it good science, right? If you make a prediction and then you test 2 people, you can't preach that as an objective truth. There wasn't enough people to actually test to see, and were they the right people, right? Are you trying to apply this result to all human populations, but you only studied 2 people that already have a disease and already have a problem? That's probably not a good sample of people to be able to deduce this objective truth that you're preaching as applicable to everyone.
Okay, so let's go into that too, because we took a whole class in physical therapy school, and it was on research methods. And I don't know, you remember that class? So
yeah, I
basically,
tried not to because it was one of the most boring, dry classes ever.
Super boring,
but we understand the importance of it now.
We understand the importance, and what that class taught me is that, however boring it was,
taught me that I didn't want to be in research.
It taught me, first of all, I didn't want to be in research. What it also taught me is that the class basically said in a pleasant way, a lot of research is garbage. That's what the class pointed, because it made us delve into the nuts and bolts, right into the thick of things in terms of studies that we'd go home with each week, and then we'd meet as a group on a weekly basis and say, okay, let's break this study down.
Let's check out the methodology.
Yeah, how did they design it? What was the question that they asked? How did they design the study? What were the participants in the study?
And let's talk about let's just talk about a little premise here of why that's important. Why? Because most people, the way they consume research literature, I would say the vast majority, including health professionals, is they look at a study, they read the abstract, they read the results, and they take it at face value that is the truth.
Exactly.
They don't even look at the methodology. And we're just talking about this. Why is a conclusion even listed on a shouldn't it be up to you to determine the conclusion based on the data set and the methodology?
Exactly. The conclusion's often, like you say, the thing that people read, and then they just go from there and take it at face value. But if anything, it should be the only thing that you don't read, because you should read the rest of the study and determine yourself whether the study was designed well, whether it even applies to you, the population. Let's go into that after, like what things can go wrong in terms of looking at a study at a baseline level. But again, you should make up the decision whether this applies to you or not, or what you can take from that study. And then you should also apply what that study showed you versus all of the other studies on that same subject, because again, one study shows you nothing. Multiple studies all showing the same thing, reproducible through multiple populations, multiple different times over multiple generations, that starts to show you something.
That starts to kind of confirm an objective truth, like we talked about. And please, people, do not quote a research study on Instagram. It is not the right platform or environment to bring up a very deep conversation by just saying, oh, this study showed this, so everything you're saying is false. Like, it's not the right environment. I just want to add that in there because so many people do it. We don't really address comments because there's too many, and there's too many silly ones, to be honest. But I think people have to understand it's not the right environment to bring up this massive research study that disproves what you're saying, because it's probably a bit too simplistic of a viewpoint, and it's just not the right medium.
And if it's just one study, like you say, it could be anything. Like, show me the actual study. The study could say anything, and then like the headlines that people then it spins off into the world of like scientific reporting, and then that's a whole other can of worms that says like they'll take this headline and spin it into this other thing in a newspaper, and then people are like, oh shit, like then the average day-to-day person reads it.
Bacon gives you cancer.
Yeah, bacon gives you cancer.
Prime example.
It's like like it's anything at that point. But let's go back to just a few basic things when you're looking at a study. The one thing we talked about so far is the design of the study. So how is it, because some studies are beautifully designed, and it takes a really good scientist, again, to use the tool of science to actually create like you'll read some studies before in our former training, you're like, wow, that it was so well designed that this conclusion makes so much sense, because it was just like, they're magicians. Scientists who can design studies well are magicians. Some scientists I would argue that a lot of scientists are just terrible at that. So are they actually like, how are they designing the study?
What's their motive for the study also? Like if you're just doing research for the sake of getting a grant to get paid to do work, but you're like, what's your motivation for doing research? That's another thing that it's usually not going to say that, right? They'll list conflicts of interest in a research study, but sometimes you have to look for people that you have an intrinsic belief that they are good scientists and they have good motives. Like Daniel Lieberman, Irene Davis, find scientists that are really good at evaluating a research study because they have a science background. It's what they do. They're PhD professors in research. And if you can find someone that you agree with, their ethics, their motivations, then you can look to them to decipher. And basically, I look to Daniel Lieberman to translate what the bulk of the research is saying into a tangible piece of information, and then we basically preach that at our seminars.
Exactly, because one of the cruxes of science is it needs to be unbiased by nature of it. Good science is always unbiased. If there is any sort of bias involved in it, when money gets involved, all these other things, then things can go really astray, and then we got to question whether it's even applicable in the first place. So,
and some people don't even realize, I think, they're biased. Like these what's the word for that? I don't know.
Confirmation bias or
confirmation bias. Well, just subconscious bias. Like if you don't even know you have a bias, but I think that's a thing too, right? It's like these people aren't bad people. They're not evil people trying to tell you false information. But I think sometimes if you go into a research trying to prove something or your current, and it's very hard to be unbiased.
It's like egotistical bias.
It's extremely hard.
If your personal truth, your whole life has led you to down this path, and you're studying this, then it's like you say, it can be so deeply ingrained that what seems to be an objective truth is really still a personal truth because you're looking at it through an egotistical lens.
Or you're trying to make your personal truth an objective truth.
Yeah,
which is nothing. At its core, that's fine. But if that gets in the way of doing good science, that's where the problem lies.
So the other thing is like study group. So who's being studied? So a lot of research is actually done using, if you look into it, it's like, who is studied? Well, university students who wanted a $10 Starbucks card, right? It's like, oh yeah, sweet, I'm getting a donut. Like I'm gonna do this. So it's like,
I've done a lot of those.
Yeah, exactly. So if you go to university, you can participate in these studies, and they give you things, and it is what it is. But again, you're studying an age group of people with certain characteristics. They're in one space. They're in one age cohort.
They're usually sleep deprived. They're usually eating like shit. They're usually sitting all day. So okay, do you want to? You can probably extrapolate those results to students. University students, but does that apply to like the day-to-day person?
No, exactly.
And there's probably a lot, but like, let's be frank, there's probably a lot more parallels than we think because most people are sleep deprived, sit all day.
but sure, but it is also like you're studying 18 to 22-year-olds. It's like there's very limited.
That's a factor.
You can't necessarily, it's a factor. Yeah. And then or if you look at other studies where they take a certain age group, or you're studying elderly, or whatever it is, you're studying a specific population. Can you extrapolate those results to other scenarios? And maybe you can, maybe you can't, maybe you can to some extent. It's hard to say. But this is where it gets really complex. The other thing is like what implementations are they using in the study? So I've been so frustrated reading like physical therapy studies in the past because basically the title of the article will say like, just physical therapy versus so-and-so other modality in correction of so-and-so.
Oh, man, that's so frustrating.
So it's like, okay, and then they'll say like, well, we found that sometimes it's like physical therapy worked. Sometimes it's like, well, it didn't perform better than so-and-so other modality. But then
what
you look
is your
at
definition of physical therapy? I think that's a bigger question.
Then you look deeper. Yeah. So again, you take that at face value and they're like, physical therapy doesn't work. Okay, well, what did they do? So once you look deeper, then it's like, participants were given like one stretch, one exercise, and they were given like a TENS machine for like 5 minutes a day. Yeah. It's like, what the hell is that?
So
That's
that was
not
sham therapy.
It was it wasn't even physical therapy. So what are we? We're not on the same page with that. So that's garbage. So most of the studies I read on like physical therapy interventions or a lot of them at least, are just garbage because the actual implementation is garbage. And so it's like, well, what do we take from that? Well, nothing, right? Because that's poor physical therapy. And then you can apply that to other areas as well. It's like, what are we actually doing to the study participants in the study? So again, it gets also very complex when you talk about that.
Let's talk about feet, because I remember reading a study that said, okay, physical therapy to correct foot dysfunction versus orthotics. Same thing. You look deeper. What is physical therapy for feet? It was like rolling a towel, and it was ultrasounding your plantar fascia like it was a joke. It wasn't.
Yeah.
That's not actually effective physical therapy, or that's not actual
for like
it's not even
6
physical
weeks.
half the time.
Yeah, like do it 3 times a week. Study participants did it for 3 times a week for 6 weeks, and then they were also tested at 12 weeks in like 1 year.
Yeah.
But it's like there's just no rigor in that.
And here, okay, this is a good point too, because I think when we're doing research on the human body, we're trying to tease out single variables from a immensely multivariable organism that's extremely complex. So let's hear, this is probably a good example. That exact same study tests physical therapy versus orthotics. Neither of those things take into account, for example, what kind of footwear is that person wearing.
Exactly.
So if you work on your feet 20 minutes a day and you spend 8 hours a day in shitty shoes that deform your feet and prevent any mobility, do you think there's going to be any significant results? Right? Like
Exactly.
The biggest thing that we preach to people in our seminars is it has less to do with adding new shit for you to do to fix your body, and has more to do with changing than taking away the negatives that are already in your lifestyle.
You're right.
It simplifies and extremely, I wouldn't say complex, but
It is
goes
complex.
much more deep, right? It doesn't have to be complex. It's fairly simple, right? Which is why I don't like using the word complex, but it is complex. You're right.
The human animal is just complex. It's just an unbelievably complex, because like every single person has their own life, and they're doing their own different things. By nature, there's so many confounding variables at all times when you're doing. So science, a research study is trying to study a couple variables. So they're trying to isolate these variables and dial them down,
Which is required sometimes.
which is
Like,
required.
we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater saying that all science is shit. We're just saying let's take a bit of let's look a bit deeper and evaluate this a little bit better.
Oh, science is an amazing tool. So we need to say, like, how can we get better at like looking at science and being critical when we look at science, and seeing where we can apply it, and whether we can use science as not just looking at one headline of a scientific article and saying that's the truth, but looking at where does that fit into the big picture? How is that study done? Is it even relevant? What population is studied? All of these different things that are very, like, you don't even have to be a statistician to go into these things. They're baseline little things that if you're interested in the topic, you could, or if you have some baseline knowledge, you can be pretty good at looking at these things and be like,
be open-minded, but be rigorous in the way you take in knowledge.
So if you've got multiple different variables at hand, and you're trying to study one or two variables, like you say, it just makes it very, very hard, because I might be, like you say, studying, let's say, orthotics versus non-orthotics. What is that person doing for the rest of the day? Are they on their feet? How much do they weigh? What shoes are on their feet? What's their life like? What's their lifestyle like? What's their pain tolerance? That's a whole different thing, because a lot of these like studies in our field use pain as one of the major metrics. And that is not good, because pain is just so subjective. And it's so crazy, because we use things like pain scales and stuff like that, but if pain is one of your main metrics in the study, already we've got to question things, because I've seen people's perception of pain is just completely different, right?
My favorite is, what's your pain level from 0 to 10? Oh, it's 12. It's like, dude, you can't even stay within the scale I gave you. How am I supposed to take that as actually legit?
I think the rule of thumb for what we see is that the people who say they have the highest pain tolerance, or say they have a high pain tolerance, it's almost like a red flag that goes off and saying like, they probably don't. But anyways, that's kind of opening up a whole other bag of worms. Pain is subjective, and a lot of things are also subjective. So I think the other thing is subjectivity in general, but what conclusions can be drawn from certain things. And that's where we just came full course, is like, you study something, you get information, you break it down. Okay, here's the information. Now, where does that fit into the grand scheme of things? And that's where we need to be better at looking, is like, where does this fit in? It doesn't say it doesn't give you anything. It gives you some stuff. The tool of science spewed out some stuff, some information, and it's up to you to apply it correctly at this point.
Yeah, and let's talk about like even so less research literature based science and more empirical science. So, how did this whole thing with the Foot Collective started? Well, it started with the realization that everybody's feet are messed up, and we kind of have the null hypothesis wrong, right? Like, I think most people take the null hypothesis as, you're prove to me that going barefoot is better than wearing shoes. Okay, that's most people's base. That's their like base foundation for most of their arguments. And it's like, well, let's evaluate that a little bit. We've been wearing shoes in the current iteration as the way they're currently built for about 50 years, with lots of support, lots of cushioning, all that shit. we've been barefoot for millions of years. So why isn't the null hypothesis, our feet function best barefoot, prove to me that wearing shoes is better for your feet? So I think people's argument is almost skewed right at the get-go. And so, like I said, we started this by saying people's feet are messed up. The more we started to look at people's feet, the more we realized that most people have messed up feet, whether they have pain or symptoms or not. And the way we're treating feet in terms of fixing foot dysfunction is wrong. We need to be kind of thinking about this a little bit differently, thinking about how the hip affects the foot, thinking about how footwear, especially, and conventional treatment like orthotics affects the foot. And so our science was start with ourselves.
Clinical science.
Clinical science. And you're patient zero. I think, when we start doing anything new with patients, I think you and me both share the same mindset that we're going to try it on ourselves first.
I think that's an important point, that a lot of that would be a lot of that is discounted. Like, there's this worship of clinical research these days. So it's like it's this worship where you'll see people like, where's the study showing that? I just want to touch on that before. It's like, just because there is not a study showing something doesn't mean that thing doesn't exist. And just because there is a study showing something doesn't mean that's the truth either.
And research costs money. So unless there's someone paying money to do a study, which automatically makes it so that there's a slight bias. Because why are you paying for that study? Are you just paying for fun? Because that's not usually the case. Do you have this ulterior motive? Not necessarily. And I think you don't want to, throw away all research because of that, because it's very easy to do that. Oh, studies cost money, so if you're paying for something, you probably have a motive. But it's like, as long as the person paying is looking to discover a truth and not looking to prove their opinion, then there's a lot of good science.
Exactly.
And I think in future, it's going to be, one thing with TFC that we want to do in future is cultivate like footwear companies like Vibram or Vivo Barefoot. If all of the footwear manufacturers in the world gave $10,000 to do a unbiased research, and someone that was unbiased was overseeing that and was like, we want to determine what the best thing for the human foot is in terms of footwear, that would be really cool research, because you could literally show and demonstrate. Problem is that most footwear companies aren't going to do that. It's going to disprove most of their products.
Exactly.
But we need good research.
And the research...
we just don't have the resources to do it right now, but eventually a big part of the Foot Collective will be fund objective research to show the truth, to determine the objective truth.
And set it up in very robust ways that demonstrate real interventions that actually... so again, that's getting into the rigor part of it again. But I think back to that point of like N of one research, like yourself. Okay, so that's a good place to start. That's a great place to start.
If you try it on yourself, it doesn't work, there's no point in testing it further.
Because
maybe there is.
Yeah.
If you're kind of on the fence, but if you don't feel an objective change, I don't know about you, but if it doesn't work on me, I'm not usually going to start doing it with other people.
And that is if you use scientific thinking, logic, and critical thinking, and do an experiment on yourself, that is, you should take that into account. Like that's important. That is not, like, you don't need a research paper to be published in order for it to be sound scientific principles that are being used. So if you, and again, that
Maybe
is actually,
you can't apply it as an objective truth right away, but you can apply it as a personal truth that you discovered that has the potential to be an objective truth.
Exactly.
If other people's data backs up and is aligned with the results that you got.
And then if we take that a step further, so you're using yourself as N equals 1, then clinical research. So that is something that, as a clinician, we do research day in, day out on clients that are coming to us in terms of, in our standpoint, the physical body, physical therapy. So we see clients, we assess them, and then we intervene with we measure things, we intervene with certain things, and then we keep measuring things to see how things are going.
Assess, intervention, reassess. Was there a change? Did
over
your
different
prediction
timelines
come true? Okay, this person has messed up feet. I think I'm going to measure how to quantify their feet. And maybe I measure their ankle mobility. I measure their ability to support an arch with load, whatever it is. You take some metrics.
Strength measures, pain scales, like we talked about. There's different things we would take. There's it's like you test on day one. You put them through the gamut of interventions, hoping that they do their part, but definitely doing their part when they see you. You keep testing things and you see how things go. Then you get patterns over time. So like if you put one patient through things and something didn't work, you put another and it did, you start to develop this big container of ideas. So, or this, you start to develop these patterns that start to give you a clinical truth. And again, that's just using that same scientific method, in the exact same way. It's just you're not doing it in the avenue of like conventional research, right? But just because that should inform you. Maybe it's not. It hasn't been put through the rigors of these other things like conventional research, but it's just as informative, right? And this over time, it's just that's what people don't get. The other thing is that
let's talk. And the other thing too is standardization of what we're measuring.
Yeah,
right. Greg Cook had a great thing. He said, if you're not assessing, you're guessing, and it's so true. So how do you find these standardized tests, like for ankle range of motion, for example, quantifying how much ankle range of motion you have, so that you have something to retest. The beam is a magical tool to assess hip stability because you can't fake it, you can't cheat. Right? Stand on the beam, don't look down at your feet, and see how long you can balance on one leg, and retest that after working on opening up the hip muscle. Like it's a very honest screen and honest test, even though it's so simple. So finding those things to measure and that you can reassess later on that are actually true, right? That are actually measuring what they're valid. They're actually testing what they're supposed to test. These are important things to not forget, because you can say, okay, I'm going to assess, I'm going to intervene, I'm going to reassess. If your assessments aren't actually consistent, then you're missing out on some quality there in terms of the science.
Exactly. So clinical research has merit if you're doing it, if you're using very robust standards and you put yourself to these high standards. So that's something you should definitely take into account. The other thing is that, like, because people think that there's not just like a study for everything. That's what kind of, you can make like these really good conclusions and that are correct. Like let's say I said, when you squat, and like I put it up post, like if you do a squat and your knee caves in, you can't control your knee, you're more likely to tear your ACL. So that's just like an example. So I remember somebody was like, well, where's the study to show that? Yeah.
So we're going to go out and tear 10 people's ACLs to prove to you. But it's like logic, people. Come on.
But there might be a study, but but you could also find it through other studies. Like, just because there's not a specific study saying that specific thing doesn't mean we can deduce, like, there's other studies showing like strength test of people's glutes or movement tests showing that, like, through a season somebody's more likely to tear their ACL if they, like, the FMS has done good tests. But it's just like, just because there's not a specific study in something you're saying doesn't mean you can find all these other studies that can help build your argument to say that, like, okay, we should probably look at that. And then that person discounts it. Well, that's not true because there's no study saying that, so it doesn't matter, right? That's this weird thing that
science is the holy grail of truth, not specific research studies.
Exactly.
So is what you're saying based on, like we said at the start, the backbone of a rational, logical argument with a base understanding of physiology of how the body works. Because if you don't have that, then you can ask a ton of questions and play devil's advocate. But, like, there's some intuitive understandings that we assume people have when we put in information, right? That they understand at a base level how the human machine works, not super deeply, but at least to a level where it's like, if you don't move a joint gets stiff. That's an objective truth that I think most people in the rehab industry will agree on. If you don't load a muscle, the muscle gets weak. I don't have to show you research to show that that's true. Like, you should have a base understanding of how the body adapts to loads that you expose it to.
And so we can go into the research, but there's no, like you say, it's like, do we need to?
I shouldn't have to. Like, to say, if you say orthotics make feet weaker and stiffer, I shouldn't, and people say, oh, how so? Yes, it's valid to say, okay, well, orthotics limit motion of the joints of your foot. Limited motion equals stiffness over time. Orthotics reduce the ability for the muscles of your foot to have to support its own structure. That means if the muscles aren't working, they're going to get weak. Like, only when someone is blinded by trying to serve their personal truth will they object to those points. And we shouldn't have to go that deep to just use that as the base logic. And that's why, explaining it to people in words like that, and then hearing how many really, really smart people in the rehab and health world are still preaching orthotics as a way to correct foot dysfunction. These people aren't evil people trying to hurt people and make them not improve or get better. They're just misunderstanding. They're taking an isolation approach to the body, which requires an integration approach always, right? Part A is connected to part B. If you don't take that into account, you're not preaching good knowledge. You're not doing due diligence in terms of science.
And then the grand scheme of things too, like all of health is the same thing. You can't isolate things down to a fine point. You need to actually look at the grand scheme of things, because all these other things, everything affects everything. Yeah. In terms of, that's why the human organism is complex, because everything affects everything, and it always will affect everything. So, I mean, that's something that we've got to take a step back from the specific, getting so deep into the research and looking at these the complexities of things, and it's just by nature that's hard to study. Some things are just very hard, if not close to impossible to study when it comes to things like the interaction of everything in the human body. It's very hard to make objective truth statements about something when you're dealing with the complexity of humans.
Yeah, you're always going to find exceptions. There's always going to be outliers. Like when and I think even another thing that's important to put out there is when we put information out on social media, we are talking about the 95%. Okay, we're not talking about the 0.0001% of people that have a genetic deformity whose chromosomes are in some way, shape, or form abnormal, which resulted in an abnormality in their foot. We're not going to talk about how to treat clubfoot because not very many people have clubfoot. We're going to talk about the global things of, open up your hips because we all spend too much time sitting. That's a more relevant topic to us. So yes, there's always exceptions to the rule, and we are talking about the 95%, which people need to understand that because it's a source of a lot of confusion and I think disagreement where people are like, oh yeah, but, well yeah, we agree there's a but. There's always going to be a but because there's so many variables in the human body. But in general, this statement holds true for 95% of people that are having issues with their feet.
Exactly.
So,
I just want to bring up the one study that kind of hit home with everything we're talking about today so far. It's this statin study that so
yes, good thing to bring up.
Basically, it was called the Jupiter study, and this just shows you how influential studies can be in terms of how everything is done. So statins are...
This is a great illustration of the state of our health system right now.
Also, exactly.
Side note before we talk about this.
So basically, statins are drugs to help control and lower cholesterol levels in the human body. So back
how many people are on statins also?
It's one of the...
Note, if you ask patients, the amount of people that are on high blood pressure meds is astounding.
Still, and so they're still on it. Now, basically, the research shows that it's the complete wrong thing to do. And it's... So the fact that... And guess what? So most doctors are still, if you have... And it also shows you the lag time between research and clinical practice, too. Yeah. So it's like something that's been disproven in the research. And I think it was in 2010 or 2009 where they really debunked this main study that a lot of people were looking at. So it's been almost 10 years now.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a huge leg. That's a big problem. In the day and age of the internet, 10 years from when something was debunked and it's still being practiced a cutting-edge field like medicine, where if you're not up to date in 2 years, you're way behind.
It was actually 2010.
Wow.
In
8 years.
A study by Lorgeril et al. Debunked this major statin study that was like the main one that a lot of people were using.
So give the Cole's notes on the premise of this study.
So basically, statins are drugs that help lower cholesterol. The question was, does cholesterol cause heart attacks? And this main study showed basically that the thinking was having high cholesterol, they're correlating high cholesterol to having heart attacks or heart issues.
And correlation and causation. Like Greg Rose said this at Perform Better too. He's like, did you know that when people sell ice cream, they commit more crimes? And it's like, oh, okay. That's correlation. It's not because ice cream causes people to commit crimes. It's because they both happen in the summer, and people don't want to go out and rob people in the winter. It's too damn cold. So it's like, that was a good illustration when he said that, because you can't say that. You can't make correlation seem like it's causation. It causes big problems.
Exactly. So
it doesn't mean stop selling ice cream and we're going to stop crime. It doesn't work that way.
So yeah, statins are basically a class of drugs that inhibits liver enzyme responsible for producing cholesterol.
Yep.
Now, what we find now is that cholesterol is actually very, very important for things like sex hormones, hormone production in general. It's a precursor. So not only are statins not effective at treating heart disease, but they're actually doing the opposite. They're actually harming us.
I don't even think we know what reducing your cholesterol is actually doing long term in terms of like the negatives.
So people are put on this, and it became this drug that was prescribed because this study showed. Here's the Cole's notes on the study. Also,
who funded the Jupiter study? Is that out there?
We'll get it. We'll get to that.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
So basically, the Jupiter study showed that when using statins, they studied this big group of people, 8,900 participants, and what they showed was that the relative risk reduction in having a heart attack, they published was 58% lower relative risk in having a heart attack when you were on statins versus not on statins. Okay. So that looks great. Everyone's like, holy crap, these are magic drugs.
Yeah. So if you take that, like we were talking about, if you take that number and you look and say, okay, this was a research paper. They had a lot of study participants. This is what they found. Perfect. That's the truth. Let's give stats to
Boom.
everyone.
Printed in the newspapers, printed to everybody. So, but what if you look a little deeper, what relative risk means is that if you look at the actual breakdown of the numbers, 8,900 participants. So 68 of the control group had a heart attack. 68 out of those 8,900.
Okay.
And 31 who were on the statins had a heart attack. So the number was 68 versus 31 out of 8,900. Okay, so the relative risk, if you actually break it down, you're only 0.7% chance of having a heart attack when you were off statins, and 0.35% chance of having a heart attack when you're on. So there's less than.
It's not even statistically significant to the point where you can say this actually shows us something.
No,
and yet
nothing.
they use the relative risk number as a very fucked up way of trying to sugarcoat and show whatever they wanted to prove.
Basically, they said, because all they published is hey, look, in our control group, 68 people who weren't on statins, 68 people had heart attacks, and people who were on statins, only 31 did.
Yeah,
out of 8,900,
out of 9,000 people.
So
do the study again. You'll probably get you could get the total opposite numbers if you did that study again. That's how insignificant those results are.
Exactly. So basically, it showed that less than 0.5% was the risk for not taking statins.
Not 58%.
And basically, what they also showed is that not only that, the amount of side effects that the statins had in the people taking the statins were causing a plethora of problems that the people who didn't take it, who didn't even have any risk of heart attack anyways, weren't getting. So by taking these statins that you had to take for life, you were not reducing your chances of heart attack, but you were having a whole slew of side effects, and you had to take this drug for life, and all the things we don't even know about.
And you're spending all the money to take these drugs.
Exactly. So then we find out that a company called AstraZeneca, who makes the statin drugs, was the major source of funding for this study.
Oh. Big surprise. Big surprise there.
So the weird thing is that this was done in 2008 when the study was published. Statins are one of the most vastly prescribed. I had the number, I forget it, but it's in the billions of dollars that the amount of statin drugs that are prescribed to people to this day. Wow. And it's one of the major drugs. It's one of the most common drugs that are prescribed. Oh. So what you see is that there's no robust research. And what there are also studies after that have been showing is again, all these other side effects and all the other things that it can potentially do harm to your body are actually really taking hold. And it's we're consuming a drug that is actually making us worse off, not reducing our risk of heart attack.
Man, Netflix needs to do a documentary and show and use that as an illustration of the state of our medical system, where pharmaceutical companies run what our doctors do, and doctors learn more about drugs, which half the time don't do shit and actually make you worse off than they do about how much sleep should you get, what should you be putting in your body in terms of diet. Those are important pillars, and they're not talking about. And instead, they're prescribing statins and told why they're effective when a huge it does. And we're not research scientists. But we can take those results and what they said there and determine that it's bullshit.
Oh, and doctors that we talk to, a lot of them are up and up in this, but most people still aren't. You go into an average doctor's office, and you'll still to this day be prescribed statins if you have a high cholesterol level. So again, we're measuring one simple metric and then prescribing a drug based on that simple metric, saying it's going to help your heart disease. Guess what? We're not looking at all these other complex variables that can be broken down into simple things. Like you say, how is this person eating? Before we prescribe them statin drugs, what's their diet look like?
And
are they getting
not
sleep?
Even talking about why. Okay, even if high cholesterol was a problem and statins were effective, you could give people statins, but maybe figure out why their cholesterol is high instead of just giving them this Band-Aid that covers out the problem.
Again, it's the exact same thing. It's not getting to the root cause. It's saying we're testing one single thing, and then we are prescribing something based on that one single thing while ignoring everything else. And that actually applies well to the orthotics thing, because it's hey, we're testing one simple thing. Hey, I have foot pain. Okay, foot pain equals prescription of orthotics, and then we're ignoring all these other things in the background that are causing it. Yeah. And then we find it's the exact same parallel.
And what are those orthotics doing? They're making your foot even worse, even though they're giving you temporary relief.
Exactly. It's the same what that Jupiter study is showing, because if you do delve into the actual research on orthotics, like we covered in the episode 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. there's no science to back it up.
Yeah, there's no good science.
So
No good
it's
science.
the exact same parallel. Go in with foot pain, get orthotics. That's the solution. Ignore all of these other confounding variables that should be addressed to actually fix the root cause of the problem.
And ignore a base understanding of physiology. If a joint doesn't move, it gets stiff. If a muscle's not used, it gets weak. Basic physiology. Basic premise to why orthotics don't work.
Exactly.
It's like I saw this thing that said orthotics don't always work. And I was like, no, that should say orthotics always don't work because it's not even attacking the problem.
It's not attacking the problem, and they might help with pain and things like that. But like again, our indicators are just faulty.
Yeah.
And
if you're thinking of anything but long term when you're a health professional, you're doing shit wrong. Right?
Exactly.
That's what I'm basing what I just said on is long term orthotics always don't work. Short term, if you're talking about tomorrow, sure, maybe your feet feel better if the little pressure point pushes in your plantar fascia and distracts your brain from the fact that it's fired up. It's like that doesn't mean it's a good
And what do they
solution
work?
long-term.
What is our definition of work? So if our definition of work is decreased pain, so the definition of work in this statin study was, hey, these studies, it works because it lowers your cholesterol.
Yeah.
If with orthotics, it's like, okay, it works because it may temporarily reduce pain.
Once again,
but
single variable. It works
variable.
because it reduces your cholesterol. Is cholesterol even a good thing to reduce? Is high cholesterol a problem? And what is all the other shit that it causes that are negatives? Those are all ignored.
Exactly.
It's like, come on.
So it's the same thing. What are we studying? And what I think our definition of work should be, we should have a higher standard of what work means for different things. And it's a general topic. But like, what does work mean? Does work mean that it temporarily relieves some sort of pain while not addressing the root causes of it that might be still compounding in the background over time? I wouldn't say that's a good definition of work. I would say that's the definition of not work. So I think we just the big point that we wanted to get across today is like we need to like the science. We live in the age of information, so there's so much information out there, and I think we live in a time where we have the most access to information that we've ever had. But
and
we
the least ability to think critically and filter information for what's good and what's bullshit.
That's the thing. So the most information, but it's the hardest to find good information.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there that people are everyone's in the same boat. It's hard because we're being bombarded with all these things. Oh, this study shows this. Oh, this study showed the opposite thing. Oh, this study showed that. It's like, okay, well,
there needs to be a higher standard.
There needs to be a higher standard, and we need to go back to some of these base of the pyramid things like developing critical thinking skills, developing logic,
using
reason,
good scientific method, using the Socratic method of trying to not always try and prove shit wrong, but at least give it due diligence to ask enough questions to make sure that it's actually valid.
Exactly.
Right? Like just look into it, use logic. And I think, to bring this full circle, if we talk about TFC and how we determine what we teach in our courses, the reason it's constantly changing, the reason we're on the 7th iteration of our manual and it's probably a completely different course than the first time we gave it, is because when we learn new things, we're open-minded and we're not afraid to be proven wrong. If someone shows us a better way of doing something, if someone proves us wrong, I think Jordan Peterson said a quote. He said, "I'd rather learn than be right." And that is so true. It's like if you're looking for the objective truth of how best do you help people understand their bodies to fix their problems, that is a very, very... That's like a very clear lighthouse, right? You have a good sense of direction, and you might shift direct. If the wind comes, your boat might veer offside, but you still see the lighthouse. You still know the direction you're going into, and that's a true lighthouse. Like that is a good goal to go for, and it's objective, and you're open to be proven wrong. And I think that's very important. So
and taking good things from different areas, because it's not, there's just also this weird thing is like, oh, that's it's these people's, that's what those people do, or that's what these people do. Like we're on the same page. We're trying to help people, and we're trying to find out what's the best. And it's just because like that group over there, that team uses this method. Are we not allowed to use that now? Or like everyone's borrowing from everybody. Like it's just something. It's a weird thing too. We live in this thing, and I understand like if you. That's the big thing they got across was like, give people credit in science, give people credit just back even from like plagiarism standpoint back in like grade school.
Which we agree with, but it's like these basic overarching principles. Every single word you say, do you have to refer to a person that came up with it?
If I had to give everybody credit for everything I did in every post, I would probably have, each post would probably have a list of like 100 names, because it's like, okay, that person learned from that person, they learned that from that person, and then it was from this. Like it just, you'd have to backtrack like hundreds of years in time to develop there. So it'd be like every post would probably take a week to research who decided who. So it's like that doesn't make sense. So it's
if someone took a picture and I'm using it, I'm going to say they took the picture, but I'm not going to say where that train of thought started from, because I would have to spend a month of research to find out the root of where that thought came from, and who pared it down and distilled it to the point where it's what we're preaching.
And we all have parallel thoughts too.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's crazy. Like it's this weird thing. Like sometimes you'll get attacked for something and you say like, hey, you didn't quote so and so, and it's like, I don't even know who that is. Like I didn't. Like
I didn't learn it from them.
I
also,
didn't
I just
learn it from
came to
them.
the same conclusion.
I learned something in physical therapy school, or I came to that same conclusion when I was moved. Like, it's just this weird thing. I actually got a message like that last night on Instagram. You should have quoted so and so for this. I didn't even think of that person when I was doing this post.
Yeah.
But again, that's just another topic for another day.
Yeah. So I mean, I think after today, null hypothesis, your feet function best barefoot. Let's be real. No one's ever had worsening problems long term, and I think. Whenever we say things, always please think that we're talking long term, because to think anything else in
sustainable
healthcare is silly. No one long term ever had way more problems by spending time barefoot.
No.
Taking your shoes off was never a bad thing for people long term. So
no, exactly.
I hope we can all agree.
No one
on
complains of that. Like the amount of people who actually buy into that. It's rare that I've never heard it. Like, no one ever said that, after spending 2 years, like, doing more barefoot stuff, barefoot training, getting my feet strong, using my feet better, using my feet more. No one's like, oh, that was a really bad idea.
Yeah, said no one. Yeah,
no,
exactly.
It's just like this weird thing. It's like everyone's pretty, and it's like the same thing. It's like, well, after I started eating more naturally, cutting out the processed stuff, eating like more of a human, I felt better, and no one's gonna complain. It's just in multiple different fields. After I started sleeping 8 hours and getting the rest I need as a human, that was shit.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
all right, let's wrap this thing up. Thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully that it wasn't too confusing conversation, and I think it's important to just have these discussions and just talk about science, because if science is losing its reputation, just like physical therapy is losing its reputation, and it's not throwing it out as something that's shitty. It's using it appropriately, using this critical thinking skill in the background, and this logical, rational kind of base of the pyramid with everything you're saying and everything you're evaluating, just using that to guide whether or not something is valid, not just reading the abstract conclusion of a research study and claiming it's true. So
use the tool well. Respect the tool of science. It's an amazing tool that humans have created. So we just need to make sure we respect it.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye.